Michoacan has always played a central role in the supply chain that stretches all the way to the US and beyond. It remains a wholesale supplier of marijuana and meth. Cocaine shipments arrive from Central and South America. The private planes land on Michoacan soil, sometimes on large countryside properties. Beneath the natural beauty of the legendary state, a war rages between two main groups that have turned this state into one of the most deadliest places on earth. Its picturesque beauty, a natural wonder of volcanoes, forests, freshwater rivers, and blessed with rich soil, perfect for the agriculture business to expand. Every year, thousands of Michoacanos return to visit their homeland. They form a sizable and important community in the US, especially in states like California. In many towns in Michoacan, curfews are enforced by sicarios. Businessmen get extorted frequently, and the gun battles can erupt almost anywhere. The lime and avocado industries have been extorted since the days of Los Zetas, back in the mid-2000s. But some growers have banded together to set up their own city governments and security forces. The size and profitability of the avocado industry allows plenty of cash to move into the hands of silent partners that oftentimes are actually cartel members with the sole purpose of extortion. The famed monarch butterflies and massive pine forests have been popularized by nature lovers and wildlife enthusiasts. But even nature has captured the attention of organized crime. Groups that illegally harvest prime hardwood trees in the forests that surround several Purepecha communities. These same indigenous communities were the first to rise up against local crime groups. Their movement would go on to inspire others in Michoacan to rebel against the traffickers that had taken over their state. The avocado industry has been a major economic force and a source of pride for the government, which loves to show off its growth numbers, as well as the lime industry, another fruit that is central to the economy in parts of the state. But unfortunately, it is this same fertile land and abundance in economic activity that has also turned Michoacan into a volatile place, a state where the government has decided to let the warring groups fight it out amongst themselves, while at the same time teaming up with one side to fight a common enemy. Entire towns are forcibly vacated at gunpoint by gunmen that are known to inflict horrific torture on their bound victims. As Michoacanos head down from the US back to their ancestral homeland, they proceed with caution. Kidnapping is a major moneymaker for various crime groups, especially in Michoacan. Extortion is common, both for large and small businesses who have no choice but to pay or end up killed, or if they have really pissed off the wrong boss, they await a gruesome scenario. In December 2006, President Felipe Calderón declared a new war on drugs. He chose his home state of Michoacan to launch a nationwide offensive against the narcos that had by this point grown beyond the control of the state. He vowed to take on the drug lords that were increasingly terrorizing the civilian population and challenging the state's power over everyday life. 14 years later, Michoacan is in the middle of a new war. The war is between the CJNG and Los Carteles Unidos. The war has led to atrocities against civilians. Endemic corruption has enabled both groups to operate without much fear of the law. They fight a bloody war for wealth and power. Mencho and his enemies are taking the war personally. In the meantime, the state's homicide rate climbs higher, while Michoacan is flooded with weapons and convoys of sicarios patrol their turf, looking for the enemy. The convoys run heavily armed because the other side is doing the exact same thing, so when they run into each other, it's on sight. Most of the violence is caused by two main organizations, the CJNG and Carteles Unidos. CJNG, of course, is led by the infamous El Mencho. Mencho sent a feared commander known as M2 down to Michoacan in order to kill the leaders of Carteles Unidos, disrupt their trafficking operations, and capture turf. CJNG forces are equipped with modern weaponry. Their hit teams are composed of male and some female members. Carteles Unidos, on the other hand, is a federation of different organized crime groups that have all banded together to stop the invasion by CJNG and throw them out of Michoacan. Carteles Unidos is made up mostly of Los Viagras, Los Apeques, led by El Abuelo, and Los Blancos de Troya, and sometimes Los Caballeros Templarios. And federal police have taken the side of Carteles Unidos and have been caught conducting operations with Viagras or El Abuelo Sicarios. Carteles Unidos are on the lookout for Jaliscos. That's the term they use to refer to CJNG members. But even with numerous groups banding together to finally push out the invaders, CJNG is advancing. And if it weren't for corrupt federal commanders, El Abuelo and Los Viagras would have been decimated a long time ago. El M2 is Miguel Fernandez. He is the most important CJNG commander in Michoacan. He leads the fight against El Abuelo and Los Viagras in and around Tepalcatepec. He and his men are considered experienced fighters and known to shoot on sight. El M2 was also responsible for the ambush of state cops that left 13 officers dead. El Abuelo, whose real name is Juan Jose Alvarez Farias, is a longtime trafficker and all-around underworld figure. He is a native of Tepalcatepec. He used to be a member of La Familia Michoacana and then Los Templarios. Soon after, he founded one of the first autodefensas in Michoacan and turned on his former partners, Los Templarios, when he realized their time was up. El Abuelo is believed to be heavily involved in the manufacture of meth and the trafficking of marijuana north. He is a man living on borrowed time. He knows if the government were to pull their forces, he will be captured and killed, and if he's lucky, it will be a single shot to the head, and not the brutal torture sessions CJNG is known for. Los Viagras are led by Nicolás El Gordo Santana and his brothers. Los Viagras have earned a reputation for being some of the scummiest criminals that Michoacan has ever seen. They are also known to backstab partners and change sides whenever it's convenient for them. In fact, at one time, Los Viagras were working for CJNG. The family is originally from the state of Guerrero. The brothers were notorious for stealing livestock, cars, or robbing drivers, traveling through countryside roads. Los Viagras linked up with La Familia Michoacana and then with the Knights Templar, where they worked under Servando Gomez Martinez, better known as La Tuta. Martinez didn't necessarily like working with the Santana brothers. He thought they were lowlives. One time, Mariano and his brothers kidnapped a local school teacher from La Tuta's hometown of Arteaga. They made a huge mistake. The school teacher was a personal friend of La Tuta. After finding out who she was, they released her, but it was too late. At nightfall, a heavily armed convoy was sent to find and bring back Mariano and his brothers to answer for the kidnapping, when they were warned not to kidnap anyone from the area. At the meeting, La Tuta was angry. How dare these mugrosos kidnap his friend? He pulled out his Glock and pushed it against the side of Mariano's dome, ready to pull the trigger. Mariano started to plead and cry for his life. After El Chango Mendez stepped in, who was also attending the meeting, Mariano and his brothers were spared. The group began as an ally of Los Templarios and then betrayed them and started taking their former partner's turf. As the Templarios began to lose power,
yo no sé si sea malandrín, pero me gusta lo bueno. No es toda mi carreta y una alhaja pa'l cerebro. Así me enseñó mi papá cuando vivía y en el cerro. No me gusta.
the brothers created their own autodefensa group and pretended to be a grassroots organization of regular citizens fed up with the Templarios. Los Viagras used their insider knowledge of Templar operations in order to bring their allies down faster. Los Viagras are the main generators of violence against the local population. The war began when El Abuelo stole a shipment of cocaine that had just been flown in from South America. The plane and the coke belonged to El Mencho. El Mencho had an agreement with El Abuelo. CJNG would land planes on his turf, where CJNG ground crews would unload the cargo and then transfer to trucks for the long haul north. And for a while, the partnership worked. Now remember, this is right after the autodefensas had basically ran Los Templarios out of most of Michoacan. A lot of agreements were being made and broken within a short period of time. Now, Mencho is not the type to forgive such a betrayal. At first, El Abuelo denied he had taken the product, but after an investigation was conducted, it was concluded that El Abuelo was lying. After it was confirmed El Abuelo was lying, CJNG units were sent to hunt the traitor down. For a while, El Abuelo began to move heavily armed with at least a dozen bodyguards, always in armored trucks. After a while, the heat died down for a bit. Mencho was preoccupied with other conflicts. El Abuelo must have known that the real war was yet to come. Eventually, through different rotations and settling of accounts, a new organization arose to fight CJNG's invasion. Los Jaliscos were viewed as another outsider coming into Michoacan to take over. The new organization was named Carteles Unidos, or United Cartels. They figured they would kick out the invaders with overwhelming numbers, the same way Los Zetas were kicked out in 2006. Except that this new group learned from Los Zetas' mistakes, and ever since then, CJNG has been giving a beating to Carteles Unidos. They have managed to grind down Carteles Unidos into a defensive stance. from assaults on Los Reyes and other towns and cities, to full-on attack maneuvers, using up to 200 men at a time. Michoacan is a different animal. Yes, Tamaulipas, Baja California, Guanajuato, Guerrero, all of these states are also violent, but it seems like in Michoacan anything goes. Sometimes it involves hundreds of gunmen battling in the mountains like rival insurgent armies. CJNG and Carteles Unidos are battling all over the state, but one area where the war has been intense is the municipality and city of Tepalcatepec, El Abuelo's home turf, and really his only turf that he controls as his own. The town has been under siege for a while now. Repeated attempts by CJNG to take over the town have failed, but it hasn't been for lack of leadership or ability. Instead, it has more to do with the government and their ability to look the other way, while Viagras and other groups operate more or less openly, under the facade of being autodefenses, of course. Although topones have occurred almost all over the state, some of the most intense battles have taken place near the Michoacan and Jalisco border. Tepalcatepec is right on the border with Jalisco. It's important to mention because of its strategic value, an important piece of its drug route that stretches from Acapulco through Tepalcatepec, Guadalajara, Tijuana, and then finally LA for distribution. Both sides are armed to the teeth, and every kind of weapon is being used in Michoacan. Assault rifles, machine guns, anti-armor weapons, grenades, grenade launchers, 50 caliber rifles, and 50 caliber machine guns. Michoacan is awash with weapons. There are so many armed groups, business is booming for gunsmiths, and anyone that has the necessary skills to convert semi-auto rifles into full auto, and of course, they create custom guns for the bosses and mid-level commanders. F and SCAR rifles are highly prized. The Limitos carries one, and it was the rifle that caught the world's attention when the Mexico City police chief was ambushed by a CJNG hit team in the heart of the capital. The FX-05 is an assault rifle designed and built in Mexico. It is the rifle that is supposed to replace the Armed Forces mix of M16 variants and the G3 rifle. The rifle is only available to the Armed Forces, but within the last year it has appeared in the hands of Carteles Unidos, which have a close relationship with the army units that patrol the area. The arms race has forced the two sides to deploy armored vehicles, known as monstros. Normally they'll take a large truck or some kind of heavy-duty pickup. Steel plates are welded on for armor. Some monstros have a good finish, while others have a rough fit. CJNG and Viagras in particular use monstros all the time in battle. Monstros are usually at the front of a convoy or as a point vehicle while on patrol, looking for the enemy. Recently, a video began to circulate of some of El Abuelo's men riding in the back of an armored truck with steel plates. The group riding in the back was joined by a camera crew from Televisa. The incredible combat footage shows varying degrees of armor protection on vehicles. When the truck begins to get hit, the gunmen in the truck take cover and yell to the driver to get out of the area. However, what appears to be 50 caliber rounds begin to penetrate the armor. The gunmen begin to panic as they realize the armor will not stop the heavy rounds. In the video, you can clearly see the 50 caliber rounds have penetrated the side of the vehicle. The war in the countryside is intense and many times involves hundreds of gunmen. In a couple instances, CJNG forces have captured mountain passes and strong points formerly held by Carteles Unidos. Regular CJNG forces hold up well, but when things get rough, they send in one of the 5 elite group of gunmen. CJNG commands 5 elite groups of sicarios. They are sent out to deal with difficult missions. The 5 units are known as Delta, Elite, Guerrero, Pantera, and Sierra. They are the most heavily armed, best trained gunmen that CJNG has. Grupo Elite is made up of former military and police. Among them are Guatemalan caiviles. Caiviles have commanded certain units of gunmen in the past. A lot of the brutality that CJNG is responsible for can be traced to the same brutal methods of the special forces from Guatemala. Besides Mexicans and Guatemalans, Colombians are also involved in the fighting in Michoacan and elsewhere. Former FARC guerrillas have also trained CJNG units on how to fight as teams. Both the Guatemalans and Colombians are paid mercenaries. Both countries, especially Colombia, have thousands of former fighters with expertise and nowhere to fight, so CJNG went on a hiring spree. On September 14, a combined force made up of Army and National Guard units raided a camp in the mountains near Aguililla. 19 sicarios were captured. Among the detainees was the infamous M2. On that night, the authorities captured the sicarios and their leader. They also found 3 monstros. The suspects were taken, and the entire convoy of around 20 vehicles set off for the city of Apatzingán. Elimidos thought he was going to prison for a while. Now here is where it gets interesting. What no one knew was that a CJNG Sicario managed to alert his network of the raid. Mencho immediately sent out over 100 trucks loaded with Sicarios and heavy weapons. They were on their way to rescue Elimidos. At some point, the CJNG convoy intercepted the military convoy, carrying their comrades. A firefight began, but in the end, the government force was overwhelmed. Elimidos and all of the captured Sicarios were set free by their fellow gunmen. The incident greatly embarrassed the Mexican government, which swept the incident under the rug. Grupo Elite was at the helm of the rescue operation. On April 25, 2020, CJNG forces were stationed in the town of El Aguaje when suddenly they got word that a convoy of Viagras were on their way to the town. The convoy was spearheaded by several Mexican army vehicles. As mentioned before, the Viagras have a working relationship with the military in Michoacan, and so on that day, the convoy arrived in El Aguaje. The CJNG Sicarios left town before they arrived. Soon after they entered the town, the Viagra Sicarios began to loot homes and businesses. After a couple hours, they leave and later set up camp in a ranch known as El Huerto. But what the Viagras didn't know was that after they left, CJNG units returned. The townsfolk told the CJNG Sicarios that Los Viagras were staying in camp just a couple miles down the road. Reinforcements arrived and they immediately set out to find the enemy. By the time darkness fell, CJNG Sicarios had found the camp. It was a massacre. Most Viagras didn't even have time to fire their guns. Apparently, CJNG used drones to locate the camp. Drones have now become part of the arsenal that both sides use. For example, the Viagras are famous for attacking CJNG monstros by flying drones packed with C4 into the approaching vehicles. Viagras have also used IEDs to ambush CJNG units. One such incident was recently captured on video. The force of the explosion was powerful enough to penetrate the armor and engulf the monster in flames. The war in Michoacan has increased the brutality to new levels. Week after week, a new torture video pops up. In one particular incident, a Viagras member was captured by CJNG commandos, led by Ivan Zigala, who is known as El Payaso. Zigala is the plaza chief of Cotija. The Viagra Sicario ends up having his face cut off while still alive, and if that wasn't enough, his face was lit on fire. The video is insanely brutal to look at. The tortured Sicario looks like a talking skull with almost no flesh left on his face. Captured enemies are almost always tortured in the most brutal way. The lucky ones are shot on the spot. People have been set on fire, cut into pieces with axes, all while still alive. For the longest time, La Familia Michoacana, and then later Los Caballeros Templarios, ruled over most of Michoacan. Then in 2011, the indigenous community of Cherán rebelled against a local group of illegal loggers that were associated with La Familia Michoacana. They kicked out the criminals and even the city government, which was the first time a large community had rebelled against the crime groups in their city. By February 2013, a new movement was born, Autodefensas. These self-defense militias were created due to the criminal activity of the Knights Templar. Initially, the Knights made it known they were different from Los Zetas. They claimed to be the protectors of the state, but pretty soon the Knights began extorting regular civilians. They would steal people's property, kidnap for profit, and worst of all, they were known to grab women off the street and rape them. Hipólito Mora, Dr. Manuel Mireles, and other leaders formed the Autodefensas, specifically to drive out the plague that they knew as Los Caballeros Templarios. Soon local businessmen joined and began to partly fund the groups. Their first batch of weapons consisted of shotguns, a few AR-15s, and even bolt-action rifles. But soon they began capturing better weapons from Templarios. In 2015, Servando Gomez, better known as La Tuta, one of the last original leaders of the Knights Templar, was captured by the government. His downfall all but sealed the end of the Knights. Although the Knights still operate in Michoacan and elsewhere, they have nowhere near the territory and control they used to have. By 2021, the Knights are now a shadow of their former selves. Reduced to extortion, kidnapping, their drug shipments have fallen dramatically, and so the payments to government officials were also affected. The Autodefensas began as a movement, with the aim of establishing peace in Michoacan by getting rid of all criminal organizations, especially Los Templarios. Within 2 years of the Autodefensas being established, they had driven most Templarios from the various plazas they controlled. Most of the original leaders of Los Templarios were either dead or in prison. The autodefensas began making headlines around the world. The documentary Cartel Land captured the movement and showcased the situation to a worldwide audience. But soon, several militias that were part of the movement morphed into criminal groups. Eventually, the government stepped in and gave them the option of either registering as official rural police, working for the government, or they had to disband and turn in their weapons. But the damage to the Knights was enough that other groups now moved in to take power. At first, CJNG easily gained ground, trailing behind some of the militias they sponsored. People like El Americano, leader of the so-called H3 Autodefensa, which was actually an armed wing working for Miguel Ángel Gallegos Godoy, better known as El Migueladas. El Migueladas is a powerful trafficker from Michoacan. He sends huge shipments of meth to the US and was a major force behind the overthrow of the Knights Templar. He is currently an ally of CJNG, and his forces are at war with Los Viagras. Although for the most part, government forces back Carteles Unidos, CJNG and Migueladas also have the support of some military units and commanders. The protection they receive allows them to continue their war against Carteles Unidos. Carteles Unidos, on the other hand, keep their autodefensa identity in order to receive support from the military. Right now, CJNG is launching raid after raid against their enemies, but for the most part, they actually have had major success in the war of attrition. They ambush convoys carrying drug loads. They assassinate their enemies in their own plazas. One example is the Uruapan massacre in November 2020. A CJNG squad had managed to locate the wife of Esteban Santana, one of the Santana brothers. She was partying at a bar. The CJNG hit team arrived and opened fire with automatic weapons. The wife survived but was wounded in the incident. CJNG has successfully created a wedge between civilians and Viagras. Civilians view groups like Los Viagras as scumbags and oppressors. Carteles Unidos are losing more men than they can replace. Oftentimes, they resort to forcefully recruiting people to join their ranks, but that's not to say that CJNG doesn't do the same. However, Los Viagras have taken it to a different level. In one example, one town refused to get involved in a war between the two rival cartels, so Carteles Unidos forces laid siege to the town. An interesting fact about the situation is that CJNG forces control no more than 10% of territory in Michoacan. Another thing is that they also have only enforcer wings in the state. For the most part, CJNG keeps most of its trafficking activities across the state line in Jalisco. El M2 most recently attempted to take Tepalcatepec. El Abuelo and his associates were in danger of being captured by CJNG. They apparently called their military contacts to request help. A military helicopter managed to carry El Abuelo and his capos out of the battle area to safety. Meanwhile, Carteles Unidos has recently taken Aguililla, but that in itself isn't too significant since towns are captured and lost frequently. Time will tell if El Mencho's campaign to bring down Carteles Unidos will be successful. CJNG keeps on assassinating Viagras and Abuelo's people. Viagra convoys keep getting ambushed. Their drug shipments are always in danger of being intercepted by commandos that specifically track and locate large drug shipments belonging to Carteles Unidos. At the moment, CJNG is on the offensive, with no end in sight for the war in Michoacan.